reality is we still are very bureaucratic as a country.
There we go. Nicole, thank you very much for being here. Pleasure for having you. I think just to make some quick introductions. You're currently based in Singapore, but you're originally from the Philippines and were long time based in the Philippines. Currently working for McCann in Singapore and in charge of DEI and other things related to HR, correct? If I'm not mistaken?
Yes. So
Correct,
I
yeah.
do have HR comms and DEI.
Yes, correct. And on my side, I mean, I'm Nicolas. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Penbrothers. Yeah, and it's first time we do this, so I hope everybody can be here with both of us here. But it's a pleasure of having you. And I guess the overall idea is a little bit also to explore not only your career and your experiences in HR and DEI from the perspective of both Philippine-centric companies and I guess more global companies like McCann, but also to talk a little bit about the global talent shortage, the future of work. I know that you're very active on LinkedIn, and I'm assuming on other medias also about the future of work, about HR, and about other things related to that. And I think that's something very interesting. And it's really interesting. I actually saw you post the one post you did a year ago about mental health. That popped up in my feed a year ago, to be very
Oh,
honest.
wow.
And
Okay.
don't know why. I remember reading it and I remember being actually very interested or fascinated by it. It takes a lot of courage actually to put that out there and to make a post out of that. So I find also the mental health aspect of what you're doing, or the little bit I saw, very interesting. So maybe that's also something we can talk, because I actually feel very strongly about mental health, both
Yeah.
in general and also for employees and
Mm,
also for leadership positions, because it's not getting easier, to be very honest. Yeah.
of course. It's getting more and more complex. So like, yeah, but yeah, like I'm excited to talk about these.
Well, why don't we start with that, actually? I mean, because I think mental health is a very important part of HR and leadership in HR nowadays. And I would assume that a company like McCann actually does a lot of mental health support and things. Or am I wrong about that?
No, 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 that's true. I think especially now, right? You are in an era wherein there's so much information out there regarding mental health. It's not a new thing per se, but because of social media, because of the internet, everyone knows about mental health. You hear, things beyond just depression and all that. But at the same time, a lot of companies are, while there is a big effort towards putting mental health as a priority, there's still a lot to be done because many are still in that space wherein, okay, like if I have not experienced it, if I have no personal connection with mental health, it's just a theory to me.
Mm.
And I don't really know how to understand and approach it. I think, like in my case, I was just not, I wouldn't say like lucky, right? But like in a way, because I went through it in my personal life, like I went through it on my own,
Hmm.
me incorporating that in the kind of HR approach and leadership that I have made it easier in a way. Like it made it easier for me also to educate people about it. I don't talk about mental health the same way as I would talk about it before. Like in fact, I never talked about it. But I've seen the benefit of sharing it to people, even in my own company. And I'm very fortunate that, a company like McCann also have been making strides towards prioritizing that.
Yeah, no, but I agree. I think one thing you mentioned really resonated with me is the whole. It makes a huge difference talking about it, but not having the experience of it, and then actually talking about it or acting on it once you have the experience of it. And I mean, obviously, I'm not saying everybody should have the experience. That's not where I'm going. But I had a very very similar experience in that sense to you. I mean, I was very encouraging that we should help with mental health. We should do things, even in my previous employment. But
Mm,
it really made sense to me much more once I actually experienced certain mental health problems due to stress,
yeah.
and stress in leadership position, and that for me was an eye opener, because one thing is to talk about in theory, another thing is actually like, oh, okay, I also got affected. And now how do we avoid this happening to others just because we don't want to talk about it, or we don't want to confront it? I think what was interesting with me and other people I've talked about it is like there's a lot of mentality. Maybe this is a very male centered approach. It's like, yes, it happens, but it won't happen to me.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know if this is a boys kind of mindset or if that also happens everywhere, but it is something I have heard a lot, at least with boys or with
Yeah.
men. So yeah, we also try to do more and more to support and proactively prevent mental health issues, because I think something also you mentioned, technology nowadays is not helping.
Mm.
It's making things faster and faster and faster, and I think that adds more and more stress, at least in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think it's a very very impactful approach, right? When leaders like yourself, like being the CEO, the co-founder of Penbrothers, when you yourself believe in it, when you yourself are open to talking about it and are doing like proactive measures towards mental health, then like you encourage in a way your people also to be more open to it. So like, so thank you for doing that. Like you said, right, it's not something we wish upon on everybody, but I think it's not about being diagnosed with any mental health disorder. It's more of us just recognizing that mental health is important and that our well-being is important, as well as our people's well-being. And whether or not you're diagnosed for something, all of us need some support one way or another when it comes to our physical and mental health.
Absolutely, and I think what you said about diagnosing, I think it's so interesting, because I think that's one of the problems with it, that it creates that stigma. Like mental health automatically means I'm crazy or I have XYZ diagnosis, and I don't think that's the point. Mental health is the same as physical health. I mean, there are different levels. You can be very very fit, you can be okay fit, you can be a little bit fit, whatever, but it's about that fit enough. And mental health, I think it's similar. It's a health component. It's about how do I balance my mental well-being in a way that it doesn't affect me, it doesn't get to the point where it starts affecting me, and worst case scenario, it gets actually to the point where it becomes a diagnosis. And I think the question there is, how do we develop that qualities in leadership? How do you help people, not just you or me or others who have experienced it, but people who haven't experienced it, to engage and to help, and to also listen to their team members or to the people around them? I'm not sure if you have any, as an HR leader, if you have any ideas about it or any best practices, something like that.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that, because I think when we talk about the topics on the future of work also, and DEI and inclusion, right? I'd like to note that the kinds of qualities that we need in leaders in today's day and age is different from what we needed from before.
Hmm.
I think like what I would always like tell leaders and tell people is that number one, that you should actually develop as a leader if you want to be future ready in a way, and if you want to adapt to the current kind of leader that the workforce needs, is number one is self-awareness. I think
Okay.
not just for leaders, but even for employees, even for our people.
Well, as a human person, like being self-aware, I think it's very important.
Yeah, like, and like it's more of constantly asking yourself and getting to know yourself, because there's always an assumption that, oh, I've lived with myself my whole life and I know who I am. But frankly, not everyone is as self-aware as we might think. It's
Hmm.
not something that's as natural to everybody, and it's an ongoing journey. So you always have to ask yourself, what are my strengths? What am I good at? What makes me tick? What are my triggers? What kind of leader am I?
And
What
and
kind
and
of
yeah,
communication also, yeah, do I usually use?
you said what makes me tick and what are my triggers, and the thing which crossed my mind is also, I think it's also very important to try to discern and what are my blind spots, because
Yeah,
those blind spots are usually where the damage really happens. Like you think, but you don't know
yeah.
about something. Yeah.
And I think we have certain perceptions. We think that people hear us the way we think they
Hmm.
do, or people understand the same way as how we perceive ourselves. But
Hmm.
there are often times that it's not the case. Like you mentioned, right? There are a lot of blind spots that we may have, not just as leaders, but even as people. So even us constantly asking for feedback and asking people, is the message that I would typically give you the same as how you would understand it? When you are self aware, you also get to connect with people better. You get to also adjust the kind of communication and leadership that you have in a way that would resonate more with the people. So I think that's one, like self awareness. Second, and I was talking about this recently on LinkedIn, is emotional intelligence.
Okay.
In the past, right? Like you can't be emotional as
Mm.
a leader. You have to have that authority. But I think now it is a strength when you are also emotionally intelligent, in a sense that you understand that people would have different kinds of feelings and emotions, different types of needs also. And like you as a leader, how do you also manage the emotions that you have
Hmm.
based on the situation? That emotion regulation is also not as easy to develop, but something that we should be mindful of, definitely. Among all other things, it's also having a coaching ability. You don't have to be a coach or, a certified coach, a mentor, but I think as leaders nowadays, you should be able to ask the right questions, or know how to ask the kinds of questions that would allow your people to speak more, to put their ideas out there, and really just understanding people. I think that's the core of it all. Just being human to each other. And yeah, like people forget that the basics of humanity is what we also need even in the workplace.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think asking is important, and being able to maybe over ask, better to ask more than not enough. But I think the other part there is something you mentioned a moment ago, is also to be able and to enable yourself to listen and to clarify, because you communicate something, but it doesn't mean that whatever you communicated, as you said yourself, is really received the way you're trying to explain it. And then that's the moment, like this back and forth of clarification, and being humble enough or being open enough to also understand, accept that maybe I'm not being understood, and maybe I'm not clear, or maybe I'm not using the right cues. And that can also have to do with how I feel at that moment. Or I mean, to give a very simple example, and it happens to me, I have a meeting which was maybe not the best meeting. I get out, I'm obviously triggered, I'm obviously emotional. I go to the next meeting. And so my way of communicating, my way of then interacting in that next meeting will be very different as compared to entering that meeting all happy and excited. It's a very, and being aware of that is obviously important, but very difficult to achieve. And I wonder this honestly. I wonder, like, how do we train that? How do we coach that at the end of the day? I mean, obviously, one example is to show it by doing it yourself. But it is not easy to train, at least in my personal opinion. Not sure if what your opinion is about it, or to teach, or to pass on. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like that's true. And to me, at the end of the day, we are all responsible for our own growth and how we hone ourselves in different aspects. And I think a lot of people would have a tendency to say that, oh, if my company is not coaching me, or if my company is not training me to do this, then I have an excuse
To
to
move
not.
on. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, no matter how much trainings, how much workshops, coaching sessions your companies would give you, regardless of what position you're in your company, if you yourself wouldn't commit, to personal development, to also personal improvement, for you to also commit to focusing on your self-awareness, then nothing much would happen, right? So I think it's more of, if we want to train that and make that part of our culture, we all have to start reminding each other that, walking the talk, and then also sharing that principle to others until it becomes a norm.
The way I understand you right now is to have that open learning
Mm,
mindset and wanting to continuously evolve yourself. And I believe if you don't have that, you're just being performative. You're just going through the motions. Okay, I did this training, I did that training, I did a DI training, I did a coaching training, but that doesn't mean anything because you're not embracing it. You're not actively embedding it into your management style, your leadership style, or your daily work or your daily life at the end of the day. And therefore, yeah, you received all that information, but you're not doing anything with it. So then it's useless. It's a waste of effort, to be very honest. Um,
yeah.
so putting you on the spot now as an HR professional, how do you try to enable people to get that mindset? Are there any tricks, any shortcuts? Now I'm curious, actually.
Yeah.
Penbrothers happens to be an HR company, but I'm not an HR specialist, which is ironic, to be very honest.
Huh, tough. But to me, I talk to people.
Mm,
I talk more to people. I try to understand people, even with leaders. As much as possible, getting the conversations going and me putting my thought into it, like listening to what they have to say, listening to their needs and all as well. But at the same time, putting myself in the shoe wherein when I talk to them, I also try to give them different perspectives that they may not understand as much or they may not know of as much. So I don't think there is a shortcut to it, but I think at the end of the day, it would boil down to communication still. Creating an environment where conversations and dialogues across different topics, across different priorities are very, very important. And, you have to create that culture when it's okay to talk about it. Things that we don't know even, trying to
mhm.
understand things we ourselves do not understand until we find the answers and the solutions to these problems or concerns.
It resonates a lot with me because I think it's that it's continuously keep talking, keep asking, and keep going deeper. Because I don't think it's anything you can chat GPT away or outsource to chat GPT. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
just very simple. And in your experience, I mean, working in the Philippines and now working in Singapore, obviously with, I'm assuming, a much more diverse group of team members around you, how was that change and how is that? I mean, how do you translate what you did in the Philippines then to a much more multicultural team, out of curiosity?
Actually, it's also like different. I mean, Singapore probably because it's a melting pot of cultures
Mhm.
too. I like that you have different nationalities. In my company alone, at least like in the Singapore office, I have like over 13 nationalities. I think between 13 to 15 nationalities
It's
in one.
exciting, isn't it? I mean, it's difficult, but it's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's beauty in that kind
Mhm.
of diversity. What's good, I think, like, transferring to a more regional and global space compared to just the Philippines is that your perspective as a leader would also be broader in a sense that, oh, things are not the same as the way it is. So, like in the Philippines, reality is we still are very bureaucratic as a country. It's more of like we're so used to red tape, but you also have so much talent, so much they're very resourceful also.
Mhm.
I think transferring to a new role now, like when I moved to Singapore, I have to continue having that resourcefulness, whatever skill that you had like in the Philippines, wherein as a third world country, reality is we don't have as much opportunity sometimes, or as much resources as other countries would have. But that enabled me, like when I transferred here, that okay, like while I was used to not having so much, now that I have so much, then more so that I can do more,
Mhm.
and putting that mindset, okay, now like what can I do more, accept and understand what you have, and then utilize that and maximize that in a way that you'd be able to make more impact.
Interesting. No, thank you for that. I mean, I think that something you mentioned about the move from the Philippines to Singapore is interesting. I'm assuming also, as you said yourself, it's challenging. You mentioned 13 to 15 different cultures. So do you feel that on the one hand, obviously it makes bringing that all together has its own challenges, but at the other hand, I think you mentioned also it does bring on a lot of different ideas and ways of doing things, and thereby in the best case, like making everything better. Is that also your experience?
Yeah, I don't know if it's specific to our industry also, right? Diversity is really something that's embraced. But what I've realized, having different types of cultures, like, well, we're still predominantly Asians. And we have certain things that we do as Asians. Like, for example, Asians are not as confrontational as Westerners.
Yeah.
And now that you merge all these cultures together, like, while Asians are still more reserved than the others, the Westerns also get to teach Asians to talk more, to speak out more. But in reverse, right, like, I guess, like, the Asian culture would also teach a different set of norm, a different set of reality to people coming from other nationalities. It balances things out, like, and it makes you more open to doing things in a more unconventional way, I would say. Yeah, like, even like for me, because I've also had so much exposure, not just in traveling but even in handling a very very multicultural and diverse team, so I'm more vocal. Like, I can be straightforward with what I want and what I need, more than my other peers.
Yeah.
But by doing that, I feel like I'm able to get the kind of respect also that I want as an HR leader, and even as a woman, if I would be frank about it.
Yeah. No, but that's I think that's the beauty of multicultural organizations, not only in terms of nationalities, but also in terms of the overall spectrum, as you said. I mean, people who embrace different ideas, different thought, also different politics and different cultures and religions or sexuality, having that all part of the team. I think that also that different cultural aspects is I think what makes it really beautiful at the end of the day. And I think Singapore in particular, as you called it, is a melting pot because there are so many cultures in Singapore, whereas in the Philippines, yes, there are different things, but at the end of the day, it's 99% Filipino, and there is a certain type of doing things which is very bureaucratic, as you said.
I was just like gonna say, right? Like, you did mention, like, in the Philippines, like, you're still 99% Filipino, and I was just like thinking about it. You know what's different? Diversity in the Philippines is not more towards how different nationalities collaborate, but more of, maybe more on different personalities, different dialects, even, like, the Philippines having multiple provinces also. So, like, it's different in that way.
No, I know, and I agree with you. I think in our case, particularly, I mean, we are 99% a Filipino company in the sense that everybody's Filipino. I mean, yes, we have a few foreigners, but what we have been trying to do very consciously is that at the different layers of the company, the different management levels, we try to interview and bring in people with different ways of thinking and different ideas or different backgrounds or different experiences, so that we don't become suddenly a very homogeneous kind of entity where everybody thinks the same. I think the moment everybody thinks the same, that's very risky, because
Yeah.
then no, you have new ideas. You don't have somebody challenging the status quo or trying to do things differently or trying to bring in fresh ideas or whatever that is, And I think that is actually something we have actively been trying to doing. And I think what you said is actually very important also, is like, well, Philippines is not Manila. Let's be very honest about this. I mean, it's a
That's true.
big chunk of the Philippines, but it's not Manila. There are extremely talented people all over the Philippines. And so how do we also bring them into the organization, and ideally without having to move them to Manila? It's also something we have been working on, because that adds to that diversity, that adds to also the diverse skill set, even within a society like the Philippines.
Yeah, no, I agree. A few months ago, I was speaking at an event for the IT Business Processes Association of
Mhm.
the Philippines. The topic was also on the future of work. And something that I talked about in relation to the future of work, if there are trends that we need to be mindful of, it's really decentralization. Like you said, Manila is not
Mm,
only place in the Philippines.
it
And
isn't.
you have a lot of talents across the country. It's just that, not everyone would probably have the number of jobs that you would have, say, in Manila. But if more and more companies, not just in the BPO industry, but even in other industries, would be more open to decentralizing, say, like either offering full time remote work or even opening satellite offices in provinces within the Philippines, then you give more Filipinos also the opportunity to work, but at the same time to show what they are capable of. Because you have so much talent that's unutilized and untapped, and it's not just their fault that they're not able to utilize that or that they're not given those opportunities. So like I think like employers need to be more open to that also.
No, I completely agree, and it's something I think COVID, for us at least, has really changed our approach. Of course, we do have clients who say, like, listen, we need people to work in the office for various reasons. But honestly, the majority of our clients are very open about having people working remotely because it's already a remote model in the first place. And in that moment, we have been taking advantage of also trying to really be agnostic of where the person is. Like, if the best talent happens to be in Mindanao, then let's bring in that talent, but without moving that person to Manila.
Yeah.
Because I think, everybody speaks about the brain drain from Philippines leaving to overseas, which is the
Yeah.
traditional brain drain. But I think there's a huge brain drain also happening historically from the countryside into the big cities. In this case, not only Manila. I mean, I think Manila is the main magnet, but there's also Cebu and Davao and a few others. But if we can find great talent in Palawan, then let's by all means let's leave them there. And I think that's the beauty of the future of work, is how do we find that balance? And at the same time, when we do that, how do we engage those members of our organization, of the team, that are remote, that are not immediately around us, and make them part of the team and make them feel part of the team and supported and taken care of and properly validated and encouraged and have access to training. It's tricky, and it's way more difficult than telling people, hey, I want everybody in the office, because that simplifies everything. But I also believe, moving forward, that if you really want the best people and the most motivated people, that's part of the future of a company and of work itself. I'm not sure what your thoughts are. Would be very interested in hearing them. But that's at least my thought about this. Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that because like before I actually moved to Singapore and during COVID, I was living in Siargao for a whole year. And I was still doing the same job as I was doing. I was doing my HR work, but from Siargao, and I was able to go through a full year without really impacting the kind of quality that I put in my work. So I do think that there is a big opportunity there that companies but must be more open to. But as you mentioned, right, it's also tricky when we're talking about performance management, training, engagement when you're a fully remote team. And I don't think there's one company who has perfected it already because people are still looking for connections. So if you're fully remote, yes, you can have virtual activities and all that, but it won't necessarily give you 100% as what you would get, say, in an in-person activity for your employees or an in-person engagement. So I think it should be a trial and error. And I also would like to emphasize that when we talk about future of work, it doesn't have to be a fully remote setting. So it
Mm-hmm.
also depends on, I would say, four different things, right? It would
Mm.
depend on what your objectives are as a company and as an organization. What's the nature of work? What kind of job needs to be done, and how do you want certain tasks to be completed. So the nature of work is also a top consideration. Third is what kinds of needs and circumstances do your employees have?
Yeah.
Because again, we talk about DEI, everyone would have unique needs that we also have to cater to as employers. And then fourth is like, what are your available resources and the support that
Hmm.
you're able to give? You are running your own company wherein I'm sure talks on finances. Like, can you provide the right equipment to your people? What kind of resources can you extend to them? Or even in terms of the location of the work, for instance. There are places in the Philippines where internet is really, really spotty. I mean, even in Manila, you have that problem. So how do you navigate through those also? I think like these are consideration, and like, do I need to be 100% remote? Do I need to be on a hybrid setup, or do I need to be an in-person kind of company? But at the end of the day, flexibility is key. And that is the future of work, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think flexibility is definitely key. And I think flexibility is not just as what type of company are you, but maybe also what type of role are we talking about? Take my company, for example. I mean, we have different types of roles and we have custodians. Obviously, the custodian who is working particularly in an office cannot do it remotely. It is what it is. It's the nature of his role. But then we have other roles, for example, an FP&A. I mean, honestly, I can do Excel files in the office, at the beach, in the
Yeah.
plane, or anywhere else. So, and I know an FP&A person doesn't do only Excel files, but I think that's the point is there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that McCann has the same. I mean, as a marketing company, you obviously have very, very creative people, and those creative people are not necessarily the ones who want to be 24/7 in the office. I mean, if anything, that kills their creativity. So yeah, it's interesting. And I think that's the flexibility where we should be looking for, is like, okay, what is your role? Do I really need to force you to come to the office, or can I enable you to have a setup which is better for you, be it hybrid, be it fully remote, whichever way it's the best for both parties at the end of the day. Obviously, it needs to be okay for both sides, not just for the employee and not just for the employer. Yeah. What
That's
else do you see? I mean, you speak. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe like what you were about to ask is like related to what's in my head currently too. I'm assuming that other things like I see would be like trends when it comes to the
Yes,
future of work. Was
absolutely. That
that
was my question. Yeah, you're reading my mind already. Very impressive.
yeah, like yeah, that's like so virtual connection does exist, right?
It does work. It's not perfect, but it does work. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, case in point. No, but like I think like we talk about future of work, but the future of work is really now, right? It's actually the present. It's the time wherein we need to start reevaluating and redesigning jobs,
Hmm.
as well as on the talent side. It's a time wherein you need to reskill, upskill, and diversify people. I know like one of the discussion points that we were intending to talk about also is like global talent shortage.
Hmm.
And I think when we talk about that, it doesn't mean that there are no people available for jobs, because
Yeah.
the truth of the matter is a lot of people are looking for jobs. I
Hmm.
mean, but you also have a lot of openings that you would see remains unfilled for a lot of months. And you guys are in, like the HR business in a way, right? And I'm sure you see this too. But for me, like what I would think is there are two main reasons as to why there is global talent shortage. Like I said, it's not because people are not available, but number one, while there are a lot of jobs available, the available talents that you have don't have the skills that are needed by the businesses. Or you have talents who are not as open and adaptable to change. when you're doing things for a very, very long time, let's say you're in a certain role or a certain discipline for like 10 or 15 years, it's so hard to shift if you have not tried anything else outside of that. More so, it becomes a problem when what you are doing is in a niche space
Hmm.
that's not as transferable. I mean, I came from the telco industry years ago. And if back in the day, telephone operators, for instance, was one of the most in demand jobs years ago,
Yeah, my
when
grandmother used to do that many, many, many years ago. Yes.
yeah, and like when there was a shift in the need, right? You see a lot of people like lost and oh, like I've been doing this for so long and I thought this is what I will do until I retire. And then the internet and like computers came into play and now these jobs became obsolete. And a lot of people who were not as ready or have not made an effort also to hone themselves in other skills had a problem transitioning.
Yep.
So that's one, right? So, you have talents available. It's just that what their skills and competencies does not necessarily align to what the business needs. And then second is you also have on the company side, you have companies who are not offering roles, environments, and even practices that align with what your talents are looking for. Companies who are not offering things that align with the motivations of your talent, the values that your talents are looking for or your candidates are looking for, and their priorities. And that impacts why there is a global talent shortage. So, like these are things that I think we should be more cognizant about.
I agree, but I wonder, let me spin this a little bit farther because I think what you said is very true. But I think what you said is when the shortage is happening in a certain way in wherever you are. But
Mm,
one of the things I see, at least, I'm currently in the United States. I came from London. When those companies and clients or talk about talent shortage, it's actually very interesting because I look at them, I'm like, well, yes, you don't find the right talent here, but
mm,
there is a lot of equivalent and equally good talent somewhere else.
yeah.
For example, Philippines, to be very honest. So I think a part of the talent shortage is actually that how do we match the need with the availability, do a good matching, and do it properly and enable it without all the secondary damages which normally it created. I mean, again, we talked a while ago about the brain drain. The brain drain is nothing but that. You had a lack of certain talent in one market, so they pulled Filipinos out of the Philippines and put them there. But
Yeah.
that solves this problem, but it doesn't solve it. It creates a lot of other problems. So I think
Yeah.
in view of the future of work, I think what is interesting is how can we solve that talent shortage problem in one side of the world without creating the negative impact which was
Mm,
before. To give you a segue, I think it
yeah.
was fascinating when I was flying over here. I was sitting next to an older lady from originally from Hawaii, but she was Asian. Her grandparents were Japanese, and she was giving me a little bit of a history lesson on her experience in Maui in Hawaii 60 years ago when she grew up there. And she was saying, I mean, it was very interesting because the white people owned all the land,
Mm,
and there were very few. And then there was the workers, and all the workers at that time in Maui, because there were sugar plantations and pineapple, were either Japanese or Filipinos. So
yeah.
clearly, people they brought both from Japan and the Philippines because there was a talent shortage. And then we go into more crazy things where she was telling me, like, well, and then we had a dirt road, and on one side of the road were all the Japanese, and on the other side of the road were all the Filipinos, and we did not talk to each other. And I'm like, okay, interesting. So that has changed a lot. But again, that's a talent shortage, which as a solution required to displace people, so to take people and
Mm,
move them, thereby creating all kinds of issues. And I think what is really fascinating to me and what I'm trying to work on is how can we help these talent shortages in certain areas, certain markets, or certain industries without displacing or without creating the brain drain, without creating the secondary damages of families living in the Philippines without a mother or without a father, or and so on and so on and so forth. And I think that's fascinating. Unfortunately, that doesn't work for everything, is what you said. If you have a factory, you need people there. It can't be
Mm.
done remotely from the Philippines. But there's a lot of things which actually can be done remotely. And I think that's where the future of work is interesting. And how do we experiment with it? And how do we find solutions that are positive to everybody?
No, I agree. Like, and you brought up a very, very good point, right? There are also like certain issues. Like, it's not just about bringing people into another location, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Because like even us, like in the advertising industry, we also like there are like Singapore is a very, very small country, for instance. There are a lot of roles or like skills that I couldn't find here too, or maybe I couldn't afford
Yep.
because it's a much more expensive talent market. But like you go to other countries, and we also have a model wherein we outsource internally from our
Mm-hmm.
other markets certain roles. So yeah, like so I'm on board with you. And I think it's important for us to understand, okay, like maybe there are even untapped markets that we have not really like looked into, apart from like looking, okay, like where are the talents at, maybe us finding a way also to say, if you go to another remote country, for instance, wherein there are people who are willing to learn, how can employers also train those people to maybe get the skill sets that they are looking for? Like, if I bring in, like fly in like one or two people who would train a good number of people for a few months, the cost of that will be much lesser than me bringing, 10 people to where my market or my country is.
And the beauty of that, I mean, if done correctly, you actually create value in that location instead of actually taking out value from that location.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think it's a very interesting thing. And as brutal as and as bad as COVID was for the world
Mm.
economy and for many people, most of us at the end of the day, I think the good thing about COVID, one of the good things about COVID, is that it has opened the mind to so many people that you can actually do a lot of things remotely, that you can actually tap talent around the world, that you don't have to take them and bring them to your place. And so I think that's at least something positive which came out of this pandemic. And hopefully that is something from the future of work perspective will continue to evolve into the right direction. Some famous names and famous companies telling people like, no, everybody back to the office. But I think that's honestly, that's a temporary thing. I think at the end of the day, a lot of employees will not go for it and will not be okay with it, or they will demand something instead. And so over time, these things will balance itself out again. And I think that's something that I'm excited to see in the future. How is that future of work evolving? And also, how is that evolving not only in terms of where do people work, how do we set up remote teams, on site teams, and whatnot, but also including your role, like the DEI aspect of it, the inclusiveness aspect of it, the diverse team building aspect of it. And really important at the end of the day for companies to embrace and to think about and to be proactive about it. Otherwise, they will not get the talent they need. And then they will really struggle. They will have problems as a company to survive or to evolve.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I think, right, like you said, you have to be proactive about it. There are a lot of things that we may not be used to doing before that we need to start doing now, even before it becomes a bigger issue. Like, even discussing AI and technology, people won't be able to avoid that really. No matter how much pushback you have, that no, like I want to do things a certain way, if we don't embrace changes in technology and AI, that's the only time that, we might be irrelevant. But as long as you keep on learning, having that growth mindset, and you're open to these changes, I don't think AI will necessarily stop people from getting jobs. I am actually a believer that while AI can remove certain jobs or make certain jobs obsolete, it will also create more jobs in the future. And that's something we need to think about. What are the kinds of jobs that it can create, and how can we now prepare for that? What can we leverage on? Like, what kinds of skills do we need to develop so that we can use AI more of support that will enable us to succeed more?
Totally agree. I think I'm, of course, there will be certain jobs which will be very negatively affected by
Yeah.
AI. But I think overall, it's like the internet. It's like what you mentioned before about the phone and other tools. It's a tool, and it's a tool that will become part of our daily activities. I mean, honestly, it is already part of our daily activities. I mean, if you go to Netflix, Netflix gives you a whole options of you should watch this, you should watch that. All those recommendations are machine learning recommendations based on what you have done previously. It's not like AI is completely new. It's just that now there is another face of it. I do think, though, bringing this all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, I do have one concern about AI. It's a concern about actually mental health,
Hmm.
because I do feel that, like any tool, be it the computer, the internet, the smartphone, like any tool, it enables us to be more efficient and thereby also faster. So what I'm seeing happening is that now we expect certain roles to be now 20, 30, 40% more efficient in what they do, because now they're using AI enabled tools. That speed, I think, could potentially affect more and more people also on the mental health side. So I think as an organization, as companies and as leaders, we need to be aware of that, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it's a little bit like what happened with the phone. It's like, oh, now you need to, or the email, now you need to be available 24/7. And then people burned, and now, we know we shouldn't do that. I mean, in Europe, there's so many laws now in so many countries, like the right to disengage, the right to disconnect. The moment you leave the office, they can't call you, they can't send you emails. It's a bit extreme, but there's a reason for that, because
Yeah.
people did get burned. People did have mental health breakdowns. And I think AI, if we're not careful, can create the same problems again, or maybe actually even make them faster and stronger. So that's actually my bigger concern with AI, to be very honest. Yeah.
No, like, and it's good to be thinking about that. Like, there is a risk to it also.
Yeah.
Everything becomes too fast. So I think it's also up to us. Like you were talking about, like policies and laws that like certain countries have placed to manage this. And while yes, it may be extreme, I feel like it's necessary
Yeah.
sometimes, right?
No,
To
I,
have boundaries in place.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't mean extreme in the sense of they're wrong. I mean extreme in the sense that they're very prescriptive. It's like the moment it's 6, there is no more emails, and it doesn't matter what you do. And so, I mean, they help and they are necessary in many degrees, because unfortunately humans have real struggle self-regulating themselves. So
Yeah.
the moment they have a smartphone with an email account, they will be checking it all the time. But
Yeah.
that being said, I think it's, again, it's everything is about finding the right balance. Yeah.
Yeah, and even like us, right? Like, so what are we doing? Like, that's why there's greater emphasis also on like self care, our limitations, our boundaries. If we're able to be more productive, and if we get our work done faster than we used to, like 30-40% of the time, how can we reallocate that time now to focus on our families, to focus on our well being? Even like I'm guilty of that.
Hmm.
Like I have that always on mindset. If I get an email, I need to answer quickly. I really don't like having those red notifications on my phone if it's left unread. And I had to train myself to disconnect also, that, I had to set up on Teams, for instance, like, do you have a do not disturb or a quiet time after
Yeah,
a
yeah.
certain period, just so I don't get the notifications? Or when I was living in Siargao, it's more my friends who would remind me, oh, like, Nicole, it's already like almost 5. We need to watch the sunset. You have to, stop
Yeah, you need to
working.
wrap up. Yeah, stop
Yeah, you
working.
need
Yeah.
to,
Otherwise,
yeah,
what's
like,
the point of being in Surigao? Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, like, so so like these little reminders, but again, like, it would go back to the basics of being human, not just to others but even to ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, there will always be a risk in everything. There will always be like consequences. We won't be able to solve the problems of this world 100%, but it's really about being conscious,
Yeah.
being more understanding, empathetic of everybody's circumstances, and aligning that with what our businesses need.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Yeah, no, very interesting conversation. I mean, I don't have much else. Not sure if there's anything you would like to talk about or say or explore, but I think from my end, thank you so much for the time and for being here. It was super interesting, and yeah, maybe we can do this again. This would be fascinating to see how things evolve over time.
That's true. Thank you so much, Nico. It was like a fun conversation. So
Yeah, thank
insightful
you.
also. Like I also like learned a lot from you. I'm also reflecting on my own like things that we're talking about. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. Thank you.